Subscribe now, and I will surround you with white light. Seriously, white light everywhere.
Beautiful.
Dog light, D-light, D-light. Ooh, that was a band in the 80s. You were too young for that.
Like not alive? Yeah.
Music is in the heart.
No, I was alive for most of it.
D-light. 90s.
Oh, all right. So I just missed it.
Ugh, love that shit. Welcome to Raging Moderates. I'm Scott Galloway.
And I'm Jessica Tarlov.
And today we're joined by retired U.S. Navy Admiral James Stavridis to help us make sense of an extraordinary week at the Pentagon. Welcome to the show, Admiral. I can't imagine how many requests for appearances you have right now. Very much appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Let's kick it off. I want you to imagine, Admiral, that, and you probably filled this role, you've been hired as an expert to make a movie as realistic as possible. Put us in the room of how the decisions were made likely to execute these boat strikes, and then what the decisions were, how it went down in the room, if you will, up until the point of the second strike.
I'm happy to. And by the way, before I was kind of famously the Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, I spent years as Commander U.S. Southern Command, which means in charge of all military activities south. So these are, if you will, home waters to me. The way this would have worked, if it followed normal course, would be that the Secretary of Defense, in this case, Pete Hegseth, would have been providing overall strategic guidance for the mission. He would then have delegated to the Commander, U.S. Southern Command, the job I used to have. That's a 4-star admiral position. And that admiral would have delegated to the now increasingly well-known 4-star Admiral Mitch Bradley, Navy SEAL. At the time of this strike back in September, Mitch Bradley is a 3-star Navy SEAL. He's in command of something called Joint Special Operations Command. Below him would have been the operational elements. Here we get into some classified things, but at the bottom line, there would have been another stop or two in that chain of command before the actual missile strike. So that's the chain of command. In terms of the room, may or may not surprise you, it was not, from all I can gather, a single room. I think the public tends to think of that because we recall the killing of bin Laden, in which everybody was packed literally into the Situation Room. And you saw the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, the President, the Vice President. In real life, that very seldom happens in that way. They're connected by a series of video conferences. I don't know exactly where Secretary of Defense was, but he was not physically in a room with Commander of Southern Command or Commander of Joint Special Operations Command. So that's kind of a snapshot of how this happens. To answer the timeline question, just based on public reporting, they see this boat, they track it, it's moving at high speed, they launch, it appears, 2 missiles that more or less destroyed the boat. Some remnant of the boat is still floating. According to many of the Congressional folk who've seen the video, to include the famous double tap second video, there were 2 survivors in the water. Then an order was given to conduct that second strike, which killed those 2. That's the best I can describe it. Based on public reporting. I have not seen the second video. I fervently hope that comes out. I think it's relevant to the conversation.
And I recognize this question is not a yes or no answer and requires some nuance and whatever color and texture you're willing to provide. Do you believe, based on what we have heard, that this qualifies as a war crime?
I don't know is the short answer,
Yep.
and I cannot opine on that until I get a look at the video. And alongside that, before I'd want to step into that prosecutorial role, I would want to see the transcript that went with the video. I'd want to see sworn testimony from the Admiral, and particularly from his Judge Advocate General, who I am almost certain would have been in the room with him or her giving that kind of conversation. That judge advocate, I think, is going to be very important to this. So short answer, I can't tell. But here's a hypothetical way to think about it, Scott and Jess. Think about it as a spectrum that runs from these two survivors were more or less completely helpless, clinging to wreckage, have no communications, have no weapons. That if we took that shot, I think there's a strong case to be made that's a war crime. At the other end of the spectrum, if you can build a case that these two survivors could have overturned the boat, recovered the cocaine, found weapons that were secreted in the remnants of the boat, I think all that is difficult to accept. But if you got to that based on watching the video and getting the testimony of those in the room, then you could get to a place where a second strike would be justified. I think we're going to find this occurred much closer to the they were helpless end of the spectrum, which means there are serious questions to be answered. Bottom line, your next question ought to be, okay, Admiral, who should be investigating this? It won't be the Pentagon IG. He's been fired. It won't be the JAGs, the three-star JAGs of the various services. They've all been fired. I don't think anybody in the Department of Defense can do an unbiased investigation. Got to be Congress. And in my view, it's got to be the House and the Senate, particularly the Senate Armed Services Committee. The Senate Armed Services Committee is headed by two individuals of high integrity, high knowledge, both veterans. On the Democrat side, it's Jack Reed, West Point graduate, deeply experienced. And on the Republican side, it is Roger Wicker, who is a former Air Force, wait for it, JAG officer himself, a lieutenant colonel in the JAG Corps, retired. Those are the right two people to look at this, pull it apart, see it all, and then render some judgment and some key word here, oversight.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned those names because I've been very impressed with Roger Wicker and his speaking out right away. I've also been impressed with GOP Congressman Mike Turner, who has been very bold in doing interviews and saying that this looks like murder to him and that we wouldn't even treat these drug traffickers as people deserving of capital punishment if we brought them into a courtroom. So the idea that we would have done that double tap strike makes no sense, and they're going to have to explain it. I'm curious as to where you think that General Holsey, who was the Southern commander and was, by all reporting, asked to resign by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth on the same day that he gave out the initial order, which now we know that he didn't say, quote, kill everyone, as the Washington Post reported, but it seems like that was the implication. General Holsey, I believe, will be testifying as we have these investigations, but what do you expect General Holsey to say?
First of all, he'd be very sad to hear you call him 3 times General Holsey. He's actually Admiral Holsey.
Did I call him that? I'm so sorry. General Holsey, I love you.
No worries. No, you're correct. Occasionally, the Southern commander has been a general, but Admiral Halsey, who you would expect as his call sign is Bull, as in Bull Halsey, the famous World War II admiral, is a man of, I've known him for a couple of decades, extremely upstanding, very impressive individual. I don't know why he resigned. There's been a lot of reporting that he was pushed out by Secretary Hegseth. Knowing Halsey and not knowing Hegseth, I would believe that could very well likely be the case. And I think he needs to come in. And I got 2 words for you in terms of this: under oath. All of this needs to be done under oath, not press conferences, not here's what I think, I can't remember, under oath. And it's going to have to include him. I think ultimately the Secretary of Defense, certainly Admiral Bradley, again, now a 4-star and commander of U.S. Special Forces Command. I think there has to be a serious investigation of this.
Okay. And then as a follow-up, I'm curious as to what you think life is like for junior officers right now.
I think the junior officers and the sailors are aware of the general flow of this, but it may or may not surprise you that from that kind of lieutenant commander, major level on down, they got a big job to do, driving ships, flying airplanes, diving submarines, conducting operations, gathering intelligence. They are, if you will, compartmentalizing this entire string of events in Washington. And I think that ultimately they deserve this investigation so that the right guidance can be provided to them. And they are aware of it, but they are truly focused on their day job of conducting security operations for the United States.
So, Admiral, you are the 16th Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. You've overseen or managed hundreds of thousands of our servicemen and servicewomen. Can you speak to the basic notion that we in the military believe in offering quarter to enemy combatants who are no longer a lethal threat, and this notion of a moral spine that we try to build and reinforce among both our enlisted men and women and our officers? Why do we do that? Why is it so important?
It's important for three reasons, Scott and Jess. Number one is it's the right thing. It is a belief in a moral code. It's been handed down to us by armies and navies that have followed these laws of war for centuries. And it is part of who we are. When someone is incapacitated or surrenders, we give quarter. We're not pirates. We don't fly the Jolly Roger and kill everybody on board. So it's the right thing to do. Number two, it's the pragmatic thing to do. Here's why. When you capture individuals, you take them off the battlefield, you can then interrogate them. Again, following the laws of war, following the Geneva Conventions, but you can gather intelligence from them. What has happened here in the Caribbean is a mistake at many levels, in my view, but pragmatically, we have given up completely any form of intelligence which could be gathered, which could then be dropped like a plumb line back to Nicolas Maduro through the sensitive drug sites, generate a target list. Intelligence really matters. You give that up when you simply kill people. And then number three, it's the, hey, what if those were two Navy SEALs, U.S. Navy SEALs? There's a significant component here of we do the right thing, hoping and demanding that our opponents do the right thing. In most cases, they do. In some, they do not. When they do not, we will follow them and render judgment. During World War II, the U.S. Navy did not machine gun survivors in the water. Nazi Germany did that. The Imperial Empire of Japan did that. In both cases, to the everlasting shame of those armed forces. It was a mistake then, and it's a mistake now for the three reasons I outlined.
And final question, Admiral. You don't know Secretary Hegseth, so I won't ask you to comment directly on him, but you served under several secretaries of defense. What, in your view, are the key attributes and characteristics of an effective Secretary of Defense?
I served under, directly reporting to the Secretary of Defense. I was 8 years a combatant commander. So I served under some absolutely terrific leaders, Chuck Hagel, Leon Panetta, Bob Gates. All of them had marvelous and, kind of slightly different qualities. I served also as chief of staff for 2.5 years to Don Rumsfeld. So I know the position very well. Synthesizing from that, I'll give you 4 characteristics that I think really matter that I'm looking for, particularly as a senior military officer in a lot of contact. Number one, I want a SecDef who is calm, who is measured, who doesn't lunge at the ball, who spends time to really understand the backdrop, the context. Number two, I want a Secretary of Defense who is knowledgeable, who spends the time to dive in and really understand the technologies, the structure of the armed forces, all of the facts that you have to have to lead a massive organization, largest bureaucratic organization in the world. Number three, I'm looking for a SecDef who has endurance, who has physical fitness, who is capable of working the extremely long and hard hours on the job. And lastly, I want a Secretary of Defense who has judgment. The payoff is always judgment. You want a Secretary of Defense who makes the right call that you can have confidence in. That's different than a perfect Secretary of Defense. They make mistakes like everybody. All the ones I worked for had attributes I admired. If I were to pick one that really was the whole package, it's Bob Gates, who, by the way, worked both for, and quite effectively, for President Bush and for President Obama.
Admiral James Stavridis is a retired four-star U.S. Navy admiral, served as the 16th Supreme Allied Commander in Europe for NATO from 2009 to 2013, overseeing global operations, including Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and the Balkans, and counter-piracy efforts. Admiral, every time I speak to you, I hope that some of your intelligence and character remains and is resident in our armed services. I just feel safer every time I speak with you. Very much appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both, Scott and Jess. And I am confident that our generation of leaders coming along ultimately will do the right thing in these very trying times. Let's close on that note. Thank you.
Love that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.